Hey everybody, Adam here for True North Wilds. Spring is coming, and that means the opportunity to catch some monster pike in nice shallow water. One of the best ways to catch those pike is, of course, with a spoon. We're going to talk about different types of spoons and how to use them to catch those spring pike today on the Deep Dive. Alright, so today we're going to talk about spoons. We're going to talk about using spoons to catch spring pike in particular. So even though there is a huge variety of spoons, from the smallest little ice fishing trout spoon to the big, massive 7-inch, 8-inch plus with the huge hooks, there's a huge everything in between. There's just an insane variety of spoons. So naturally, because we're talking pike today, we're going to focus mainly on the bigger sized ones. So we're not really going to go into anything that's less than, a couple inches. Anything under 3 inches, really, I'm not going to talk about today, because you want some big pike. You're not going to catch big pike on a 1-inch spoon. You might, but your chances are a lot less. So we're going to keep the focus basically on 3-inch plus spoons and talk about the different types, the different shapes, the different actions in the water, and when exactly you want to throw them and where exactly you want to throw them to catch those big pike. So what is a spoon? A spoon is obviously named for the rounded shape that you see on an actual spoon. I have read, I don't know if it's true or not, that they were actually made originally by cutting off the handles of spoons and drilling holes through, and that's how you get your spoon shape. So you can still get actual spoons, and this surprisingly works quite well. I've caught actually a lot of fish on this. I originally bought it as a joke, but it's still in my tackle box because it actually catches fish. But anyway, spoons come in a whole host of different shapes and sizes. They're one of the most versatile lures that you can possibly use. They catch walleye, they catch bass, they catch pike, they catch lake trout, they catch other types of trout. They pretty much catch anything that you might fish for. But around here in Manitoba, southeastern Manitoba, where I am and where I fish, they are pretty much associated with pike fishing. They're known as a pike lure. They're known as a go-to pike lure. And there's a good reason for that. It's because they work. Naturally, there's a whole host of shapes and designs for spoons. Everybody's probably pretty familiar with a standard sort of flutter spoon, as it's called. It's a basic spoon shape. It's sort of your prototypical spoon. It doesn't have much in the way of curvature. It's got that little bit of a curve. It's got the nice round shape. It imitates a bait fish, and it's called a flutter spoon because typically it's fished, in particular for bass, it's fished for casting and fluttering down, and then jerk it up, let it flutter down again, jerk it up, let it flutter down. So it's a flutter spoon, and the design of it is to get that flutter as it sinks in the water. There is a huge variety of styles that have spawned off of that basic spoon type. I don't even know the names of all of them. I'm not going to pretend to be knowledgeable about all the different names for every different style. For example, I know this one is called a canoe style. You can see the exaggerated, almost like a check mark type of curve, and it's very narrow. You have ones like the Freedom Minnow. I don't know what the style is called again, but you can see that it's got a hook through the middle as well as one on the back, and you get this extra chatter. You get the big, wide, thin spoons like this Magic XXL. And from Moldam, Canada, you have the Pike Attack, and you can see it's a corkscrew shape. Now, all of these have different purposes, and that's just a small sample of the different shapes of spoons that there are. So really, when you're fishing, you know you want to use spoons, you know that they work, but what type of spoon do you want to use? That's what we're going to talk about right now. So all of these different shapes, all of these different curves affect the action in the water. So the most important thing you can do is when you're looking at the different spoons, you're trying to decide what you want to use, test them out. If you know you're going to be casting and retrieving You want something that's going to retrieve with a good action on the retrieve. You don't want something like a basic flutter spoon that's designed more to cast and let it sink. You want something that's designed to give a lot of action on the retrieve. The different shapes will affect that action. You might see something like this one, which I got from RCS Tackle, and you can see that very odd shape. You can see that flipped up part on the front. Now you might think by looking at this is going to keep it up on the surface or give it some sort of upward action in that way, because you would think the water's hitting that beak there, almost like a reverse dive bill, right? You would think it would be more of a surface style lure. But if you actually take this out and test it, or throw it in a tub like I did and test it, you can see that bill, despite not being the intuitive action that you might think, what it does is it actually stabilizes it. This thing, as it's traveling through the water, stays very still, very straight. As it sinks in the water, it actually sinks horizontally very straight and without a lot of flutter. So if what you want is a very steady presentation that's not going to move around a lot, maybe you don't want to spook them, surprisingly, this would be the go-to spoon with that style of reverse dive bill. You wouldn't think of that just by looking at it, but if you go out and actually test it, throw it in the water, or like I did, throw it in the tub, and pull it through a couple times, you'll see very quickly what it's designed to do. They're not always intuitive. So that is something that would actually be really good for early spring, when they're just spawned out, right at ice out. There might be even still a little bit of ice on the water, but they're not looking to chase. They're not looking for a really hard meal. They're looking for a nice, easy meal. They get spooked easy. They're very stressed. They just laid their eggs. We're talking just, days after spawning, even just a couple days or the day of. So most pike fishing is going to be more post-spawn. It's very hard to catch them on that day of spawning or the day after, that couple day period where they're really stressed out and they're really not looking for a meal. It's really hard to entice them. You got to go really subtle and make it just easy. You got to put it in front of their face without a whole bunch of flash and a whole bunch of action and noise that'll just spook them off. Most of the fishing is going to be after that. So once they spawn, they're stressed out while they're doing it. They're depleting a lot of energy to do it. They move away from that, and now a few days after that and moving on into the rest of spring and early summer, they're starting to replenish their energy. They're starting to feed more aggressively, and they just get more and more aggressive up to summer. So you have that little bit of a transition phase where they're not fully stressed out yet. They're willing to feed, but they're not in that full-on aggressive feed mode yet. So you want something that's sort of that mix between subtle and flash. You want to attract their attention. You want to give them the opportunity to react to it, but you don't want to do it in a way that's going to spook them off if they're still a little bit stressed. So you don't want to, for example, have something like the Freedom Minnow at that time period where it's got all kinds of noise and chatter and flash, and it's this huge wobbling spoon. This would be something that you use later. For that subtle period, use something more like the canoe style, something more narrow with a bit of a tighter action, or something like this one, which I also got from RCS Tackle. It's a narrow, it's a bit on the smaller side. This, you're looking at a 3.5 inch spoon here, but it gives you a tight action. So the way that this is curved, it looks similar to other spoons, but it's a very subtle change in the curvature. And that change makes it a very tight side-to-side action in the water. So it's giving you that flash, it's giving you that representation of a bait fish. When it sinks, it's sinking fairly steadily, and again, very tight. So the pike that are still a little bit stressed, they're not in full-on aggressive feeding mode yet. You're not going to spook them as easily with that nice tight little action. It's not going all over the place and flashing and chattering it right in their face, but you're giving it that little bit of lifelike action. You're giving it that little shimmy side to side that it might be just enough to entice them. And the ones that are getting a little bit more aggressive are going to start to look for that bait fish shimmy, that little bit of a flutter as it's going down. So this is something you would retrieve pause, let it sink, retrieve, pause, let it sink, and then you will possibly entice some hits that way by fish that are starting to look to feed but don't really want to go after those big, aggressive lures just quite yet. Something with a tighter shimmy like this is going to work really well. If you want to get on the bigger side, you go with a longer spoon like this one, the canoe style from Blue Fox. Same narrow profile, same tight shimmy side to side. This one, because it's longer, is going to have a little bit more flash, a little bit more action in the water, but it's that same sort of tight shimmy in the water. And when you let it sink, it's that same sort of tight pattern as it's sinking in the water. Moving on past that transition phase, so now they've spawned out, they're sort of past that stress, they're gone through that transition where they're taking a breath, they've relaxed. Now they're full on in feeding mode. So we're talking, 2 weeks, a week and a half, 2 weeks after spawn. It depends on the waters, it depends on the pike, and it depends how early they got to spawn and a whole host of factors. But when the bite is on, when they're in that feeding mode, you'll know. That's the time of year where I often say, you can throw out an old shoe and they'll go after it. That's where you want to go big. You want to go big and you want to go flashy. That's where you start getting out of those 3, 4, 5-inch lures, and you basically fish exclusively 5, 6, 7+ inch lures. That's where you go with something like the Freedom Minnow that has the extra chatter, it has the extra beads, it has the extra noise, it has tons of flash. When you get into the bigger size spoons like this, you'll notice that this one is very wide. It doesn't have a huge curve, but it has a wide profile. Something like the Magic XXL, same thing. You see it has a wide profile, not a huge exaggerated curve, and it's a steady curve. It doesn't have the waves like some of the others do. Like the RCS Tackle one has that sort of an upwards curve at the end. This one, it's wider, but it's a one steady curve. Same with the Freedom Spoon. It's generally just one steady curve. And you'll see a lot of the big spoons are like that. One big steady curve like that. The purpose of that and the way that that affects the action is if you go out and you test something like the Magic XXL here, it has a huge, wide back and forth motion. You get tons of movement in the water with a fairly slow retrieve speed. This one in particular has a fairly slow retrieve speed and gives you that back and forth, back and forth. Even when you stop and let it sinks back and forth. It looks like a leaf. If you think of a leaf fluttering down through the air, that's what this looks like, fluttering down through the water. Back and forth, back and forth. And then when you start to retrieve it, back and forth, back and forth. Something like the Freedom Minnow has a lot of that same back and forth, side to side action with the addition of the extra noise and the extra chatter. These are good things when you're in that super aggressive feeding mode where they're just packing on all the energy that they can get. They're eating everything they can eat to replenish their energy and get ready for summer. In summer, when it gets really hot, they're going to go down deep and they're not going to be as aggressive feeding because water's warmer. They don't have to expend as much energy. Right now, the water is still cold in the spring and they still need to build those energy stores, so they're aggressive. The challenge becomes getting them to go after your lure rather than the balls of bait fish that are all over the place right now. In the spring, of course, the water's all oxygenated. It's not just pike that come into the shallows to spawn. All the other fish come into the shallows to spawn too, including the bait fish. This is where you get tons of bait fish around, and that's, minnows and chubs and smelt and all that actual small bait fish. But you also get walleye coming in to spawn. You also get, cisco and bass, and everything is spawning in the spring for the most part. And pike are predators that will feed on anything. So how do you stand out? You stand out using flash, noise, and a really aggressive action. Something like the Moldem pike attack as it corkscrews through the water. So you can see that it's this twisted design. So you don't get side to side with this, but you get the flash because it corkscrews through the water. And then the color and the flash given off by the contrasting green and silver, and then you get some sparkle with the end here. As it goes through the water in a straight line, it's giving off a lot of flash, it's giving off a lot of action, and it's just a really interesting look. Now, when would you throw this over something that's side to side? This would be more if you're targeting a certain area. So you got to think of where you're casting into when you're trying to decide which of these action types or which spoon style of curve to use. Something that goes very straight without going a lot of side to side is going to be good if you have a narrow area that you need to cast into. If you have a very specific location that you want to cast to and pull through, you don't want it going all over the place. You want that narrow, or if you know there's a small channel and there's weeds on both sides, you want to keep it in between the weeds. If you got a bigger open area and you need to attract something from further away, you might want to go with something like the Magic Double XL with that wide leaf shape. And as you're pulling it, it's going side to side like this. You're flashing everything over in that direction. You're flashing everything over in that direction. You're flashing everything over in that direction. Back and forth the whole way through. You're targeting a larger area, not necessarily something that's fairly concentrated. Something that's fairly concentrated, you want to sort of concentrate on that area. Something that's less concentrated, if you want to target a bigger area, you're obviously going to try and cover a bigger area. So you got to think of those things when you're throwing spoons. And then just narrow it down from there. How big of an area do you want to target? Do you need something that is big, flashy, side to side, all over the place? Do you need something that's a little bit tighter, but maybe makes a lot of noise? Maybe there's a lot of vegetation and grass that's maybe blocking the flash on either side. Maybe you need to make some noise to attract them. Go with something like the Freedom Minnow that has those beads in there that's going to make a little bit of chatter. Do you need a big lure that is a tighter shimmy still? Depending on, are you going through like rocks and you're going through a lot of obstructions? You need to kind of keep it in a straight line. Go with something like the Pike Attack, or go with a traditional spoon that's more narrow and it'll give you that tighter pattern. All different kinds of options with spoons. You really can't go wrong. These are all very small adjustments that you can make. If you throw the appropriate size of spoon, you're generally going to have some luck catching pike. But as soon as you tweak and really pay attention to the blade sizes, blade shapes, the exact action that it's giving you, and really dial in what you're going for, whether it's wide or narrow, whether it's flashy, whether it's tighter, whether it's more subtle. If you start making those adjustments, you're going to start getting bigger pike more consistently. And of course, that's what it's all about, right? So we've talked a lot about different shapes and curves and all that stuff. And obviously you can tell that I really like using spoons. I really like the variety of spoons. One of the last things I want to just mention is all the different bits and bobs that you can get on a spoon. In particular, these spoons that I have from RCS Tackle are a good example. You can see that on the back end, I have this small red blade attached to the split ring where the hook is attached. It doesn't affect the action. All it does is just gives that little bit of extra red color, that little bit of almost simulating like a blood trail that's really going to get the predators going, right? You want to use good quality swivels. You never want to tie your line directly to a spoon. A lot of spoons will just come just with the hole. You don't want to tie your line directly to the spoon, not only because they tend to have sharper metal edges that'll cut through your line, but as you've seen, these things have a lot of action in the water and they will twist your line up really, really badly. You always want to use a barrel swivel to a split ring. And if the spoon doesn't come with it, you want to make sure that you have extras on hand to put those on, and just allow that big freedom of movement that you need for a spoon. Especially when a spoon has a lot of movement, it doesn't take long to foul up your line if you don't use those components. So that's the video on spoons for spring pike fishing in particular. I hope that was somewhat informative. I plan to do more of these and just pick a topic and talk a little bit about it. Spoons, they're just great. They're so versatile. There's such a huge variety of them. You really can't go wrong throwing a spoon for any species, but in particular for big pike, and in particular in the spring when there's the changing conditions and you can really adjust the spoon to match those conditions. Highly recommend that if you don't fish spoons right now, that you pick a few up, give them a try. You're definitely going to have some success with them. So leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this video. Let me know if there's any topics you'd like to see, anything you'd like to see me talk about, and I will try and get to it. Do my best. I always enjoy reading comments. I always try and reply, so don't hesitate to leave some feedback. Don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/TrueNorthWilds, on Instagram @TrueNorthWilds, and of course our blog site, TrueNorthWilds.com. In particular, if you like this video and you like learning about pike fishing, I recently wrote a blog post about pike fishing in the spring. I've been told it's pretty informative. I'm pretty happy with it. I encourage you to go and give that a read through if you want to know more about fishing for pike in the spring. Let me know what you think about all that. And as usual, thanks for watching. And until next time, I will see you outside.